Today, we dive into the 3 rules of a good dungeon master.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Now, hey guys, I have a fantastic interview coming up, but first, if you like this podcast, please consider supporting it in some way. You can like, rate, review, or subscribe to it wherever you are listening to it right now. Those things really help people find the show, and that's what I need, guys. I've been doing this show for a while, and it is awesome to see the growth that has happened, but I need it to grow even more to really justify me doing these episodes each and every Wednesday. Also, if you have the means, you could support the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. All right, here's today's interview. My guest today is a retired Air Force pilot, an avid gamer, and a dungeon master tutor, Joel the Major Burt. Major, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure, man. I really, really am excited about this. Been looking forward to it. DiceGeeks.com is awesome, man. I got to tell you, I want to tell you, I went to your website. The thing I love the most about it, I think, it's all great, but for me, the about section where you have all your old character sheets.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, it was really awesome when I found those again. And I know I've told the story on the podcast a few times, but it was after my father passed away. We were cleaning out the old house, and I found them back in a closet, like tucked in the book, the scanned pictures of the old red cover with the 3-ring binder hole punches in it. I found them just tucked in that among some old magazines, like in a back closet. And
awesome.
Yeah, I know it was something else just to find them. So I thank you so much for, going to the site and checking out the site and everything like that. So I
absolutely
really
one of the reasons I love RPGs is because, it's nostalgic, and in those memories, you remember, you talk about the old games that, hey, remember the time when we did this, that's one of the few games you can do that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about because, yeah, there are people, that I haven't talked to in maybe a decade or two, or maybe even 3 now that I'm realizing I'm getting older. That I can just mention something, I could just hit them on Facebook and say like 1 or 2 words, and they could just like write back with like paragraphs of like, oh my gosh, yes, we did that one thing, that reminds me of the whatever, session of D&D or whatever we were playing.
Exactly. It's like I like to call it it's the story that never ends.
Yeah. Yeah. That was really cool. Yeah. Well, how were you first introduced to Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role-playing games? Did it start through Dungeons and Dragons?
Actually, no. It's interesting. Yes and no. I guess is a better question. Well, I was about 10 years old. This was this was back in 1980, and so I was like 10 or 11 years old. I got a Christmas present from my aunt and uncle who lived up in Milwaukee. And I'm originally from Georgia. And so, they lived way up in this mythical place called Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which, of course, I'd never been to. And I opened this game up. It was a game that unlike any I had ever seen. It was Fight in the Skies by TSR, the old World War I aviation game. Mm-hmm. Which I still play, by the way. And it's and I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And in the game, of course, I punched out all the little airplanes, and it didn't have a standard fold out like Monopoly board game. So it's unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had this massive grid paper. I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't really understand the rules. I was little. It looked immensely interesting. And so in there was an ad flyer for this game called Dungeons and Dragons. Like, oh, that looks cool. Wonder what that is. Well, a couple of years later, got introduced to that, and that actually helped me understand how to play Fight in the Skies better too. A lot of the concepts, it was not roll your dice and move your little, top hat to Boardwalk. It was this different kind of games, and so then I became a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons. Which I still, in fact, I call myself, Matt, an Omni gamer. I love games of all kind. I mean, we discussed my love of college football. I love any game. I'll give any game a try. I mean, I'm serious. Any game, computer game, tabletop social games, any of them. But my favorite are the tabletop social games. And of those, my favorite game of all is Dungeons and Dragons. It is the king of the social tabletop games. And I love it for many reasons. One of those is the fact that it is the story that never ends. It's always there. It's kind of like the 100-Acre Wood for Winnie the Pooh. It's always there. Just all you can do is just dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's interesting. I always find it fascinating to see how people come into the hobby. But then if you're describing yourself, and we'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons here in a minute, but you describe yourself as an Omni gamer, I take it that led you to playing many, many tabletop role-playing games. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
It's such a, I'm not against any kind of gaming or anything. I mean, I love computer games. Like I play Fortnite like a lot. I'm playing right now. I'm playing Sea of Thieves and Below Zero. I mean, Subnautica Below Zero. Oh my goodness, what a great game. Okay. But for me, my favorite is the social tabletop games because it is social. And it's something that you have an experience playing a computer game, and it's a great experience. But it's not the same experience. And, when you have a great gaming group and you sit down with friends and family who you love, and there's just, like I say, the table of fellowship, mirth and love and friendship. It's just a great experience, and it can only really be done with a tabletop game. I guess in our forebears, played a lot of cards. Cards were kind of filled that gap. Mm-hmm. And now, gosh, we're in a golden age of gaming, aren't we? I mean, we have tons of games. Oh, my heavens. More than I'll ever know about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's quite amazing. And you're touching there on kind of the social aspect of tabletop role-playing games. And kind of over the years, because I started playing in 1982 when I was 9. And you kind of mentioned some things there. Over the years, there have been times when I thought, oh no, tabletop role-playing games are going to go away. And if I told that to like a 20-year-old nowadays, they'd laugh at me because they're so much popular, Yes. And because I remember in the early 90s when, say, Magic, came out, the card games came out, I thought, oh, well, tabletop role playing is going to go down. And then when the video games, when video games started really coming into their own and introduced kind of the online multiplayer aspect, I was like, oh no, tabletop role playing games kind of going to go down in popularity. Of course, I was totally wrong. And I'm glad, as you mentioned, I mean, we are in, I think the golden age, back in the 80s, everybody heard about Dungeons and Dragons, but hardly anybody would play.
Right. Yeah. Just us few guys that would like, sometimes when folks looked at us like we were a bit odd.
Oh yeah.
But nowadays it's quite mainstream. You're right. And it is, it's kind of a happy, and it is surprising, Matt. I mean, I feel the same way. I didn't know you and I came to games pretty much at the same time frame there. Mm-hmm. These kind of games, RPGs especially. But you've definitely hit it on the head. In fact, just the other day, I put up something about my Dungeon Master class, and a friend of mine from college wrote me and said, "Hey, this isn't on a computer by now? I mean, are you guys still playing this with dice on the table?" I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't believe it, dude, but it's actually in its greatest form right now. Mm-hmm. Right now is the time to play D&D. Yeah. It is. This is the time. This is the golden age of D&D. I know you would think it had gone away, but it hasn't. It's still here, and in fact, it's doing well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just absolutely incredible, and just even knowing some of my younger friends who are in their 20s or in their 30s, several of them have like multiple games per week, and I'm just blown away by it.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just totally blown away by it because, kind of in the desert period, there was this like, I mean, in the kind of the late 80s and mid 90s and that, I mean, it was really hard to find, unless you were in like a dedicated circle. It was really hard to find somebody who was, who wanted to play. And I've talked about it a lot on the podcast, so frequent listeners will know. But like for me, like the Star Wars West End games really kind of kept role playing alive because I didn't have to explain a world to anybody. I could just say, hey, Star Wars, and everybody's like, yeah, of course. And then I would say, you want to play in that world? You want to be in that world? And everybody's like, yeah, I do. and then it's just like, oh, and by the way, is I can teach it to you in 15 minutes, make a character in 15 minutes, and we can be playing in like a half hour or 45 minutes or something like that. And there was no cultural baggage,
right,
kind of things. And so, to me, like just seeing this now, I mean, like I said, I'm just blown away. Like I could send out a message on Facebook to certain people and probably put together a game of D&D tonight, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, it just blows my mind. It's just
absolutely. At my the game store, my local game store, Heroic Adventures here in Edwardsville. By the way, excellent game store. If you haven't gone to Heroic Adventures, go. It's the best game store around. Heroic Adventures in Edwardsville, Illinois. But they, I love them. Those guys are the best. But they got a sign up sheet right now of players wanting to find groups. I mean, you could go today and get 5 people easily who want to play D&D now. Yeah. They got a sign up sheet, man.
Yeah, that is, I mean, and like I said, I mean, it's just awesome. It is just so cool. And it is kind of funny because, you mentioned my website, dicegeeks.com, and that it was just funny because even though I had continued to play over the years, I did have some breaks here and there as, real life, I had to do real life things, but it was just kind of interesting that I kind of started having a renewed interest of really digging into role-playing games right at the same time that Dungeons and Dragons was just exploding in popularity. And so I just find it incredible that there's so many people are playing. It's just fantastic.
And you hit on something too that is absolutely true. You're a great example of this. Your products are top notch. I use them. Your Fantasy Towns book that I got, I love. And you wrote something. I'm gonna read this to you because you wrote it. I'm gonna read it right here. I got it right here. Your first line, your first sentence in this book: a tabletop role-playing game master can never have too many resources at hand. That is a true statement. And, that is a true statement. And you got a great example of the third party stuff that's out there is immense. I mean, it is. If you just go to Dungeon Masters Guild or Drive Through RPG or just your game store, there is a horde of support material out there, and a lot of it is very high caliber. It's really, I mean, again, we're in this golden age where there's so much content and there's so much ability to enjoy the game and enjoy the game how you want to enjoy it. For me, we talking about that goes gap filler games. Like for you, it was West End Star Wars. For my gaming group growing up, it was we continued to play Dawn Patrol / Fight in the Skies. That was a fun one, but it's more of a tabletop board war game, Although it did have some role playing aspects. Yeah. But the game that we played a lot was old Fantasy Games Unlimited Villains and Vigilantes.
Oh, okay.
That was a game that we played a lot. And I think someone bought that and has reprinted it in its original form. And I think they also have an updated later version, which is awesome. That game is still out there too somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And And like I said, I mean, like you're saying there with the third party material, and thank you for reading that line from my book there. But it is true, right? Like if you're running a game, I mean, even if you're running a game once a month, let alone once a week, you need the dungeon master needs materials. We need something to draw with. We need at least something to spark our imagination, and and so again, like you were saying, like this golden age, I think, and I think you even mentioned there's so many role-playing games you couldn't even play them all, right? Let alone even learn about that they exist, because there are so many nowadays. And I think it's awesome because there are different takes on, there are different takes on traditional fantasy. There's different takes on rules. There's diceless systems. There's all kinds of stuff that just have different takes on the way games operate, and just the way tabletops are played, let alone setting material, which is just just tons and tons of setting material, which is fantastic. But now you did mention something there. You said you teach a class, and I did introduce you as a dungeon master tutor.
That is correct.
Yeah. So now I'm wondering, like, when you first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, did you start, running games really quickly, or did you play a while first, or how did that kind of go?
I started as a player, and I think like a lot of guys, it was at like a summer camp, and I actually had gotten the basic set, the one with the dragon sitting on the hoard of treasure, and you had the heroes in the foreground, not the red box, but the one that came a little bit before that, the old basic set. And I'd read it, and I understood it. And we played, I think, a couple of games locally, but I didn't play a D&D, with the hardbound books, the advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I think it was like at a summer camp, and I had never played that version before. So of course, you sit here, you're going to be the cleric, and you take the Cure Light Wound spell, and you don't have an opinion, and just shut up and do what we say. And so
awesome.
It was, a lot of people I think have that as their D&D origin story. Yeah. You're playing the cleric, you're taking the Cure Light Wound spell, and you just heal the fighter, and we're all going to get through this. And of course you don't, you all die, and I think we were playing, keep on the borderland like everyone did. It was fun. It was a blast, and I had a blast. And so definitely started out as a player, and then coming back to my little group at growing up, it was we kind of shared duties, but I went on a kind of a big hiatus from D&D for most of my military career, because obviously, I was, as a pilot, I was gone a lot. And of course, I'm a combat veteran. I was in combat a great deal. And so, I didn't have time, just simply didn't have time. And, but after I had more time, after my military career had settled in, certainly after my military retirement, and the kids are at a great age. And so I picked those old books back up, and I said, hey, you know what? I think you guys would like this. And so we've been running a campaign now, the kids, my wife and I, and friends of ours together, for about 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's been great. I mean, it's literally been great. And so I did not play second edition AD&D, for instance. I was not around for that, essentially. And then a little bit of 3.5. I did go all in on fourth ed. I sure did when it came out. And then I am very happy fifth ed is out. I love fifth ed. To me, it is my personal favorite version of D&D. I think it's the best version of Dungeons and Dragons ever made. I think it's the game that the original designers wanted to make. I mean, I'm serious. I really believe that. Mm-hmm. I think it's the best version of Dungeons and Dragons ever is fifth ed. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that could be a little controversial in some places because of edition wars, but I tend to agree with you, though. Although I have to say, I did what did I miss? I missed third edition pretty much.
Me too.
Yeah, I was, I'm trying to remember, I was in college or something, and it was just no way to really find a group, to really carve out time from what I was doing to really find a big group to play. Third edition and that. So I pretty much missed that. Played only a couple times of fourth. A guy, one of our friends in our group kind of brought up that he had gotten fourth, and we played a couple times, and then like fifth came out, and we were just like, this actually looks really good. And I was really blown away by fifth edition as well. And I enjoy it quite a bit. And now, that was a number of years ago, and it's like, I play quite a bit, So that is awesome. And oh, by the way, I'll just take a quick second to thank you for your service.
Thanks, man. Well, I really appreciate that. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that, buddy.
Yeah, no problem.
It was my honor. It was definitely my honor.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And just kind of continuing on, with some of the things that you said there, running a game for 14 years, you obviously pick up some things, and then, teaching a class about dungeon mastering, I bet you have some ideas, and I love to talk about different ideas. Of course, I wrote the little book, The No Prep Game Master, where I talk about some ideas, yes. But so, maybe just to kind of kick this off, like what is just like something important that like every dungeon master should know, just like right off the top?
Well, I'll tell you, man, that is pretty much my class. My class is I pull back and I look at D&D from a very top level standpoint, and I bring my class up there. So, okay, let's look at this game. And I don't really say it in these terms, but that's kind of the goal of the game of my class, is to have the dungeon master view the game in. Let's get out of the nuts and bolts for just a minute, and we're going to get back down to the nuts and bolts, and we're going to talk about, how does this rule work? We're going to talk about, hey, what is this little tip? What kind of information do you get? And what do you like to use? What resource do you like to use for this, that, or the other? And we definitely include that in our game. But for beginners, though, from the beginning of the class, though, mm-hmm. I give them my 3 rules, my 3 rules of D&D, the 3 rules of Dungeons and Dragons, the 3 rules of being a great dungeon master. Number 1, love the game. Number 2, love your players. Number 3, love their characters. It really can be boiled down to those 3 rules, dude. And that's how I start my classes. It's love the game, love your players, love their characters, and it all flows from that. And then I can explain all those in greater detail, obviously, what I mean by that. But followed on very quickly by the concept of our game. Let's have the concept in our minds of our game. It's not my game. It's not your game. It's our game. And specifically what I mean there is the game of the dungeon master and the players. It's our game. It's so let's make sure we're playing our game, and we're not playing my game, and we're not playing your game. We're playing our game. And because I came to this, Matt, because I kept getting a lot of the same questions from players, from dungeon masters. How do I handle this problem? How do I handle a guy that's not really wanting to play or seeming like he wants to play? How do I handle, quote, problem players? And one of the first things I want to, and the reason I teach the class in this way is because maybe you're the problem. Maybe the dungeon master's the problem. That could be. I mean, let's look at that. And so what is the goal of this game? The game is a game of heroic adventure. It's a social tabletop game where we're all, having fun. And it's a story that we're telling together. And that kind of is the focus of my class, Matt, is to get people kind of in the right mindset that this is a cooperative environment. Let's not fall into the trap of players versus dungeon master. That is not adversarial. The dungeon master certainly has the very important job of creating the antagonist, creating the challenges for the the players and their characters to overcome. But it's done in order to tell this great story. And the heroes of that story are the characters, not your NPCs, not the bad guy. The heroes of this story are the characters. And so hence love the characters, want them to succeed. Let them be the heroes of the story. And so, yeah, that I do that, as I call it, cage the gyros as a piloting term. Let's recage your gyros so that you have this, what I call a mindset that facilitates a game of heroic adventure that we play together. Let's start with that as our platform. And a lot of these problems that I keep getting questions about tend to not exist anymore, you see.
Yeah. And that's really interesting too, because I think that is some of the ideas right there that you're bringing out. And yeah, we'll dive into them here. I think, some of those ideas are definitely important to bring out, because they're, almost any given day, if you hop online and you go over to Reddit on our RPG, you're going to see, how do I deal with a player who does this?
Right.
How do I, or a player saying, how do I deal with a dungeon master who does this? And you're usually reading about some kind of horror story, right? Where,
yes. And
the player, the dungeon master saying the player, is just on their phone all the time, is not engaged in the game, and then the player is saying that the dungeon master has their character in the spotlight or something, and you're just like, oh no.
Exactly. And so all those people, I say the same, hey dude, you need to come take my class, man. You need to come take my class. We can fix this. It's not unfixable. And Matt, one of the things also led me to the Major's Guide to Alignment is at the cons, you go to conventions, and I mean, to be quite frank, you see a lot of bad experiences. There's a lot of great experiences too. Don't get me wrong. I love cons. I love them. I always go. I think they're the greatest way to get exposed and to go and have fun. And it's a great place to go and have fun. Sometimes though, you're sitting and you see guys playing an RPG and you're like, oh, okay. They don't get it. They're not following the 3 rules of love the game, love your players, love the characters. They're not following them. And you can see it start to break down. And it's not hard to do. It's really a mindset and the concept of let's play our game. Inclusivity is something that's important, and D&D is the most inclusive of games. I mean, everyone is included. It's a game where we want everyone to be included, is maybe a better way of saying it. Some people may not feel included, but you want them to be. And that's, D&D is the king of that. I mean, it's because it's a team game.
Yeah.
And that part of that team is the dungeon master. So yeah, I always start my classes with this kind of spiel, as I call it, to kind of recage your gyros, to get them thinking in this mindset of, oh, wow, okay, I see. We need to, it's more of an, bring some empathy to that table.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I kind of mentioned on the show, it's just like, sometimes that, why I felt like I could write a little book about, how to game master, like the no prep game master, is because I have committed all of these sins, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I have been the dungeon master that has his own PC that is the hero of the adventure. I have been the dungeon master that thinks he is against the players. I have been the dungeon master that I have been the dungeon master, frankly, that lets the players run all over me and break all of the rules, and not just like, and not, kind of even make it a game, really. I've done them all, right? And I've been a player. I've been a player with dungeon masters who have done probably all of them as well. And, I'm still friends with most of them except for that one guy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. This all comes from, just like you, man, this all comes from experience, man. I mean, I'm in my 4th decade of gaming, so I'd hope I'd learn a little bit in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're not learning, something's wrong, and that's what I think too. So let's start with your first one real quick.
Yeah.
You said love the game.
Yes.
I mean, this one should be obvious, but like, why is it important to love the game?
Well, it should be, and it's kind of a duh statement, but it does bear mentioning because love the game, put the effort in to know the game, understand it. As Dungeon Master, you're going to be relied upon, not exclusively by any means, but you should be familiar eventually with the rules. Now, I tell my young DMs, especially my new DMs, listen, don't let that be an impediment to becoming a Dungeon Master. If you get the starter set game, the new 5th Ed starter set with the Mines of Fandelver, that's an excellent set, by the way, especially for new players. I said it's designed for 5 people who have never played D&D in their lives to open that box up. 4 of them are going to be players. One of them's going to be the Dungeon Master, and you guys can play the game right then. So you don't have to have any of this stuff memorized or committed. You don't have to be super familiar with the game before you become a Dungeon Master. Okay, let's just put that out there right now. But as you are the Dungeon Master and as you continue to play, let that love of the game drive you into learning more about the game. Hey, how can I make this game better? Let's look at this resource over here. Maybe I could use that. Oh, hey, this is a great idea. Listen, I said, and listen to your players too. Love the game as the game is progressing, as the game is being played. Really be excited as the DM too. That energy that you have for the game is going to translate into a positive experience most of the time for the players, if not always. And so, listen to them. I mean, all the time, I get great ideas from my players. Like I'm serious. And that doesn't mean, when I say to play our game and be the you're not the adversary, it doesn't mean you can't be sneaky. It doesn't mean you can't be devious. I mean, make challenges memorable for your players. Yeah. Make the challenges, make them challenging. You don't have to be easy on them, but do think about what would make a great story. Have that kind of idea in your head, and then utilize what your players do as well. Boy, that would make a great story. For instance, I'll give you an example. My daughter we were playing D&D. My daughter said, you know what? I bet this guy and this guy are in the league. I bet they're working together. We need to watch out for that. And I said, well, they weren't, but they are now because that's a great idea. And of course, I didn't say that, but I'm furiously writing notes down, Uh-huh. And I'm like, I do it all the time. And I call it stealing. And I tell my Dungeon Masters that steal from everything, everybody, steal ideas, steal from movies, steal from books, steal from comics, steal from whatever you think will work to make your game a better game. And in that love of the game, that's what I mean by that. Love the game. Want to improve it.
Okay. Well, yeah, and you're giving away stuff from my book.
Yeah.
That's what I talk about in there because awesome, absolutely. I call it listening to the table.
Yeah, man.
So now it's a little harder now if you're playing online. So I'll grant that. But like if you're playing at a table with people just around a table, yep. And you as the game master or the dungeon master, you get up and you go to the refrigerator or something, and you hear them in the other room, and you hear, like you said, your yep. daughter just said, man, I think that innkeeper and that thief we met are working together. You're just like, you're in the kitchen, pouring a drink or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, they are now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They
weren't, but they are now because that's exciting, and clearly it's something they're interested in.
Exactly. And so they already have buy-in. They already yep. have the player already has the buy-in. Absolutely. Because they were thinking about it, and absolutely. And I do, I do like your approach there too, about with the rules and that. I take a lighter approach on the rules because, you can always find out a rule, right? Yep. Like, I mean, I think it was a few years ago we were playing 5e. I think it was the first time we had done mounted combat, right? Like one of the characters is like, hey, I'm on a horse and I have a lance or something. And I was like, I haven't done mounted combat since I was like 12 years old. And I don't know what edition that was. And anyway, I didn't use any of the rules when I was 12. So I was just like, I didn't want to stop the action, but I said, okay, here, run it like this. But by the time it came back to me, I had the rule, and I said, here's the rule. Here's how it works in the book. Why? Because I had a laptop right there. I just pulled up the rule on mounted combat, right? And so I didn't want to break anything, but I wanted to give him some kind of mechanical effect. But you can find out the rules, really quickly. And
correct. But you brought up something. That's what I mean when I say this. Know the game. Know the game. You let that love of the game that you have drive you to know the game. And so you demonstrated that specifically what I'm talking about. When you said, I don't necessarily know this rule, but I know enough of the game that I can make one up that'll suffice until I do.
Yeah.
You see my point? Mm-hmm. You knew the game well enough because you love the game. You knew it well enough to make up a rule that was sufficient until you had some time to look up the rule. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm talking about. You knew the game, see? Mm-hmm. You knew the game enough to make that on the fly, because Dungeon Masters are gonna have to do that.
Yeah.
You have to do stuff on the fly always, because your players are always going to do something that you did not consider.
Yeah,
it is always going to happen. Just count on it. And so, keeping it kind of loose and having an understanding of the game. And what I mean by that too is the gaming environment. For instance, if my players were, the adventure was going to probably lead to this one area perhaps, and let's say the players did something, they just went completely hard left and went somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Okay, you should have enough knowledge of the environment to be able to handle that. And so even in the very beginning, like say you've never been a dungeon master in your lives, that Mines of Fandelver adventure is really great for this purpose. And that's why I told the young guys that if you're gonna be the dungeon master, what I would encourage you to do is read that adventure cover to cover 3 times through, so that you know what's supposed to happen, so that when it doesn't happen, you know how to react. And that's what I mean by, know the game, love the game. You need to be able to, because the DM knows the future. In a way, he knows the future. He knows what's going to happen in terms of at least what's supposed to happen. So that'll help you. In other words, it'll help you not be caught cold, because you have already, you're very, very familiar with the subject.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because, I really, coming from, like we had talked about earlier, coming from a place when, there weren't a lot of role players to a time when there are a lot of role players. Like, I developed some of my ideas about game mastering because I want people, who've never played Dungeons and Dragons before to be able to be a dungeon master, right? Like, because if you're in a certain group of friends and nobody's ever played, somebody's got to be the one who jumps in first, right? And says, well, I'll run the game. And if everybody says, oh, well, I have to have played as a player, or I need to know all the rules before I can be a dungeon master, nobody would ever run a game. And so I try to let people know that it's just like, you do have to know some things, I guess, that are just basic about how the game, that there are difficulty numbers and that you roll dice with modifiers. I mean, I think you could probably do it with just knowing that, that, you need to have, the player has a 20-sided die and they get a +4 and they're trying to roll above a 14, or something like that. That would be about it. But some of the other rules, you can learn them, or the player, I always like to say, what was it? I ran Curse of Strahd for my group. One of my players played a barbarian Path of the Zealot. I don't usually play barbarians. I don't know the Path of the Zealot at all. So my player says, oh, well, this ability gives me this, and I'm and I say, okay, what does that mean? And he says, I'm rolling 20, 1d20 +7. And I'm like, okay.
Right. Sounds good. Exactly. And that's the players. They also should love the game, because that means, hey, take an interest in your character, understand that character. And again, Matt, I'm not suggesting that any of this has to be known up front.
Sure.
This is a progressive process. This process takes time. As you continue to play the game, let that love of the game just continue to keep you into it, so that you're learning more and more and more about it.
Sure.
So that it makes, with the goal ultimately of not being, I'm the world's authority on D&D. Far from it. Let's make it so that you can make the game more enjoyable for yourself and everyone else.
Yeah.
And being comfortable with the rules over time. Again, it's always going to be kind of daunting at first. And you're like, gosh, this book's so thick. And you don't have to memorize that, dude. Don't even worry about it. In fact, half of it you may never read.
Mm-hmm.
You may never read half of this. And that's okay, because you don't need it. Yeah. But it's there if you do. And like you said, you can, especially now, man, there's lots of resources to find stuff quickly. But understand the mechanics and understand enough of the game that you don't have to go, okay, or you can minimize the times where you have to hit the pause button and look something up. Where you can roll with it. And then I'll tell you, you probably have the same problem I do sometimes. I'll confuse editions. Like I'll pull something from 4th edition that ain't a rule no more. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hold up, that's not a rule anymore, because I think we just did that wrong. But that does happen.
Yeah, I usually do it between systems sometimes. Like, I'll forget, it's like, oh, right, we're playing 5e. We're not playing, Star Wars, the 6-sided dice system, or Fantasy Flight Star Wars or something like that. Oh, right. We're playing 5e, and because I'll ask, make a health roll, and somebody will look at me strangely, and I'll be like, oh, I'm sorry. You don't do health rolls in D&D, right? Like I'm sorry. I'll roll the damage or for the person or whatever, because I'll get the systems confused. But no, I totally agree. And I think that, over time, learning more and more is great. But that front loaded part where, still, I mentioned it before on Reddit, there's the problem player post, but then you'll also see the post where it's like, I don't think I'm ready to run a game yet. I've only been playing for like 6 months, and
you're ready, dude.
What?
You're ready.
You're ready. You could have played. You could have played. You could have ran a game before you even played once.
Yeah. So. I know. And I tell the guys that I'll have a question about, what about world building? I'm like, okay, let's talk about world building. Good question, dude. You ain't got to have your world built before you play. Oh, yeah. In fact, there's parts of our campaign world that aren't colored in. I have no idea what's on that side of the map. I mean, I'm dead serious. In fact, a lot of times, one of my friends wanted to be a character from this one part of the game world we play in, and I said, "Awesome, tell me about it, because I have no idea what's there." Yeah, and and so I'm like, "Cool, you tell me what's there." Yeah, and so now, guess what? It's part of our game world, and again, it's our game world because of that. It's not mine; it's ours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about that in my book as well. It's just that I think there was an idea back in in the 80s, especially when I was playing, although I will say I didn't know how to really play the game, right? I had like one example before I got to start, I was so obsessed with it. I started running a game like after one session, so it's just like, I didn't know how to play, right? Like I didn't know how to play. I didn't know how to play. And nowadays, you can go on YouTube and watch people, and you can learn a game. You can just learn a game by watching somebody. I mean, I've done that with a number of systems that I know I'm just probably never going to be able to play. I'll just listen to a YouTube or listen, watch some stuff on YouTube, and it's just like, oh wow, that's an interesting way to play or whatever. And
exactly, and that's something else. The game, the way you play. And this again, love your players. What is this? That's the second rule. What does that mean? Well, first of all, love your players. Make them important to you. Hopefully they're having just as much fun as you are. That's what you want. You want that. Yeah. And so, how do you, as you're playing our game, not my game, not your game, what is the way we want to play this game? What is that way? Let's find that way. And that comes through time. It comes through playing a lot of games together. And you develop the version of D&D or the way you want to play this RPG, whatever it may be, it develops that becomes the way you play, and it may be different than the way another group plays.
Yeah.
But you're all playing our game, and that's really what's most important. It doesn't necessarily have to be, the rules as written. Okay. Yeah. I always say, hey, know the rules as written so that you can deviate from them knowledgeably when possible. But doesn't mean you have to hold fast to them. I mean, it all depends. There's a great deal of it depends in RPGs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, of course, love the characters. And that really is love their character. Let them be the heroes that they are, and provide for them challenges that showcase their talents, that showcase, let's say when you're a player, you want your guy that's your guy. You want him to be the star. I mean, that you want him to be the guy you want to play. You want to play him the way you want to play. Yeah. And so let the guy play him like he wants to play. And, and you may have some growing pains there. You may have to make sure that he doesn't, like, say you have a guy who's had a tooled up fighter, for instance. Okay, great. But let's just make sure that it doesn't become the fighter show. And, as that player has to realize, hey, we're still playing our game. It's not the fighter game. But from the DM's perspective, you can read the table. Let's see, what are people getting up on the edge of their seats about? What are they laughing about? What are they excited about? What are they not? What are they hanging back in on their phone about? What's going on? Read the table. These are important skills for the DM to eventually gain if they can. And some people have the ability to do that more than others.
Yeah.
But of course, when you're playing with people that you know and love, it's easier because you know them.
Yeah.
But at cons, sometimes when you're playing with the person you haven't met before, it can be a little bit more challenging, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the three loves. Love the game, love your players, love the character. That's where that comes from. That's what that's kind of all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And two, you mentioned something else there, when we were talking about running the games, you had talked about the dungeon master knowing what makes a good story or something like that. And I think that, along with a couple of the other things you mentioned, like listening to the table, like reading the table, including your players in kind of world creation, those things are super important. And then, and then I would say, vastly more important than knowing the rules is for a game master to just really understand what makes a good story. And there are times, right? Something is going to happen in the game and you're like, actually, if this other thing happened, that would be just a way cooler story. We'll make that thing happen.
Absolutely.
Because, there are just some times when something like that happens. And I know we don't have to get into, fudging dice or anything kind of,
I straight up lie on dice. No, there's nothing controversial about it, man. Yeah. No, the DM prerogative. If it's better for the game, I lie on dice all the time.
Yeah.
But typically I let them fall where they fall, roll where they fall.
Yeah.
But if it is better for the game for the monster to not roll a critical hit right now, or if it is better for the story for him to roll a critical hit right now, because the challenge is going a little bit easier than I anticipated, and this was, I want them to have a little bit more of a challenge. I think it'd be better. They would enjoy it more. This is a little too easy for them. Oh heck yeah, dude! Oh, that one that I rolled up, natural 20. God. Look at that. Lucky strike. He got you. All the time. It's called Dungeon Master Prerogative.
Yeah. And
but you have to have, I only recommend that if you have firmly the concept of our game in the front of your mind.
Yeah.
If you have firmly come to love the concept of our game, then DM Prerogative helps.
Yeah.
And it doesn't become adversarial, because you can see where that DM prerogative can become abused.
Yeah.
But if not, if you focus on our game.
Yeah. And I think that goes kind of with everything. Like you just said it there. It's just like, if that's principle or whatever you're doing, if you're abusing it, you're doing it wrong. Right?
Bingo. Then you're not playing our game. You're playing your game.
Exactly. And I think I would say I tend to fudge the dice a little bit less nowadays than I used to in the past. But of course, I've totally changed the way that I run games. Now I am pretty much no prep. And when I say no prep, I mean, basically, I think about things.
Yeah.
I think about things when I'm driving, when I'm, taking a shower, when I'm eating lunch or whatever, and I look for situations in everything that I consume. If I'm watching a movie, I'm looking for situations. If I'm reading a book, I'm looking for situations.
Absolutely.
If I play a video game, which I don't get to play a lot nowadays, but if I'm playing a video game, I look for situations or ideas, and I just tuck those in my catalog, right? Because as you were saying, right? I'm married. I have 4 kids. I mean, it's just I don't have hours and hours of time to spend on this stuff.
That's right.
So now that when I'm running a game, I usually rely on the dice a little bit more because I have no idea what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So it's just I may fudge it if I will fudge occasionally when I see a really good story hook.
Right.
And it's just oh my gosh, that goes right along with this other character's background. Right. I'm doing it. But if I don't know what's going to happen, I think in the tendency years ago when I would railroad my players more, I would fudge the dice a little bit to kind of make a certain outcome happen. And I was abusing the system. Right.
No. Yeah. And that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about that kind of fudging and no, I'm talking more about actually in combat, where if you can kind of control the throttle there on, hey, is this encounter? This encounter is going a little bit too harder than I thought it was going to. They're getting way too many lucky strikes here. Let's throttle these guys back so the next critical they roll ain't a critical.
Yeah.
Or this is a little bit too easy. Let's go ahead and throttle up a bit and let's throw a few more hits in there that may or may not be actual hits. Yeah. But you mentioned a good thing, railroading, something I am very much opposed to. In fact, I have a rule that I share with my class, and that's the never say no rule. I don't say no to my players. And people are immediately like, what? That's impossible. You can't do that. What are you talking about? I'm like, I know, I'm serious. And they're like, come on. And what if I asked for something impossible? I said, good question. And this really is a rule from improv. The yes and is always the answer to everything in improv. You probably know that.
Yeah.
You don't ever say no, or rarely do you say no in improv. And so likewise, I should say I never say no. And I mean, there may be some occasion where I have, but rarely is maybe a more accurate term. And here's what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. I'll use this example. A player says, okay, I want my character to jump to the moon. Okay. You could say, no, you can't do that. Or you can say, okay, sure. And my answer is always, sure, roll the dice. You're going to make an athletics check. Look at that. You rolled a natural 20. You jumped higher than you could possibly have ever jumped. You've never jumped this high. For a fact it's a personal best. Everyone around you was very impressed, and you did not, and you failed to go to the moon. So yes, and you fail, I say all the time. Mm-hmm. No, I don't say, and they're not the same thing. Mm-hmm. No is no, you can't do that, meaning that you cannot try to jump to the moon. You've just shut down that player. You have handled it out of game, where yes, and you fail is entirely handled within the game. See, go ahead. Try to jump to the moon. And so now there may be consequences for that, because now maybe the innkeeper thinks you're crazy, or I don't know. It's the same story as hey, the thief, I'm going to pickpocket the innkeeper. No, you can't do that. Or you can say, yes, go ahead, pickpocket the innkeeper. See what happens when you try to pickpocket the innkeeper.
Yeah.
And let that play, let that consequence now becomes part of the adventure. And so it's all handled in game. So the yes and you fail is a far better tool than no, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. I talk about that as well. The yes and is very important. Sometimes I will use the no, but and not necessarily about shutting down a character's actions. So I will say no, but there is this other thing. So like if there is an idea, like a character is having a certain idea, like say, they're on a 3rd story roof or something, and they're like, they need to jump off, and they're like, is there an awning below me? And I'll be like, no, but there is no.
That's not telling them they can't. They can't.
Yes. They can't do an action. Yes, that's the important key right there. It's not telling them somebody. I'm never telling somebody they can't do something.
Exactly.
Right. I'm just going to clarify something. Say no, there are no awnings here, but there is a fruit cart underneath you.
Yeah. Or you could say, it's
something like that.
Or something silly like, no, there are not a million gold pieces in this room.
Yes.
Of course, those kind of no's are part of the game. But my mind is specific to. No, you can't take that action. You can't do what you choose to do. And that, because I don't like railroading, because as soon as you say no, you've railroaded.
Yeah.
As soon as you said no, you can't do this.
Yes.
You've railroaded. But no, go ahead and try it and see what happens. No, you've far from railroaded. You've opened the world up now to the consequences of those actions, which, by the way, were not written. No one, no one was going to anticipate you trying to jump to the moon, or the adventure doesn't precipitate, jumping off a 3rd story window.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't anticipated. So I like that, because it now becomes part of the adventure. Maybe it lead to a very memorable part of the adventure.
Yeah.
And you could say, hey, remember that time you tried to jump out the 3rd story window into the fruit cart? You remember that?
Yeah. That's when it becomes, when it becomes stories, right?
Exactly.
And that's where too, like with combat, I usually think I'm, or like you were saying, like fudging dice, usually it's for, I have to fudge some dice like that because I gave my, my party of 3 second level, PCs like 4 orcs instead of 2, which I should have done, or something like that. So that was my mistake, right? Like that was my mistake, now, if there were 4 orcs guarding some big temple and I told my players that they were there and it's hard to get into, and the 2nd level characters went there and attacked them anyway, well, then that's on the
Booyah.
players.
Exactly.
That's on the players. But if I'm just doing a random counter in the forest and I throw something way too strong at somebody, well, I just broke the game. I'm just kind of.
Or you miscalculated, maybe.
Or I miscalculated.
You were like, hey, I think this will be an appropriate challenge, and it's turned out to be a little too difficult. Or, oh wow, I thought this is going to be more of a challenge than it is.
Yeah.
I miscalculated on that, and we're only human. Of course, we're going to make errors like that.
Yeah.
And also, because of we using a random system, the dice sometimes just roll funny, and it may be that this was an appropriate adventure, but the dice were hot, and they were more effective than they otherwise would have been, and so it's these things happen, but and so that's why I'm a big believer in retaining that DM prerogative, because sometimes you do have to, throw a couple of shock absorbers in there. You got to throttle up or throttle back, like I say.
Yeah.
And occasionally it does happen. Normally it doesn't. Normally it's, that bell curve is intact, but sometimes you get in these outliers.
Yeah.
But there's something you mentioned earlier that I really, really wanted to hit on again was the, hey, are you really sure you want to go and attack those 4 big burly orc guards in front of the temple? The clue bird, sometimes I call it, but I will allow what I call intelligence saving throws.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times the players know more than the character, and sometimes the character would know more about something than the player might know.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like, hey, what are the properties of this herb? Well, the player may have no idea. But the druid character he played would absolutely know. Yeah. And so I will allow a lot of times an intelligence check.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I use that as a mechanism of, you might want to rethink your choice. I'm going to make you make an intelligence saving throw, and that allows them to maybe spot something kind of like a perception check that maybe the character spotted that the player didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that just I use that sometimes as a, are you sure you want to get into this? Mm-hmm. Because you've clearly missed something, a critical piece of information. And I don't always do that, but I will if sometimes when the players hear me say, "Hey, make an intelligence check," they're like, "Oh, we may have missed something." And it will cause them to go back and review and maybe talk a little bit more about their plan, which is kind of interesting. And sometimes I may throw it in there just to throw them off, to make them think that they may have missed something. See, and so I do that only to add suspense, because suspense is a big part of the game, and you want those encounters to be a little bit uncertain. Hey, or it has happened. Oh no, we've got this. We don't got this, because there was a surprise waiting for them that they didn't see. That was intentional. And you could have oh man, this is going to be a tough one. I think this is going to be a tough fight. That edge of the seat feeling. I really want to engender in my encounters where I can, and it is finding it, making it that it's perceived to be difficult when it's actually very appropriate. And not being too difficult. Sometimes you miss the mark on that, and you have to, you may have to manipulate a little bit, but most of the time you don't. Most of the time you're pretty, because every party's different. And by the way, that is my absolute favorite part of Dungeons and Dragons. My favorite part of my favorite game is watching the synergy of the players, watching how the combination of the player and their characters combined with the scenario and the adventure and the challenge that it is they're facing, and watching them overcome those challenges is absolutely my favorite part of Dungeons and Dragons, because every time it's different, because the player and the characters are different, and the scenario is different. So it's a unique experience every time. And watching those players learn how to work, not only learn their player and how to play that character, but also how to play with the other characters and the things they can do together. To me, it is my absolute favorite part of the game. Yeah. To watch that process. It's really, really awesome. Yeah. And to try to make that process as fun as possible for not only me, but them, so they're really engaged and they're really invested in overcoming whatever this issue is.
Yeah. And, just some of the different things that we've been talking about. Like I said, there's some controversy about fudging rolls or DMs, making intelligence checks and things like that. And usually to the people that are bringing up those things, usually I say to them, well, then you be the dungeon master. you run us through an adventure then, because I'm here doing it. And I'm trying to make sure we're all having fun, including myself. And if you have a problem the way I run a game, then you can run games.
Right. And they, I would ask that person, are you comfortable with the concept of our game, or are you playing your game?
Yeah.
And a lot of it really comes down to that. Are we all playing our game, or are some of you playing your game? Yeah. And a lot of times you see that, and it's these problems are overcomable. But you know what, Matt? Sometimes, most of the time when you have a gaming group, none of these things crop up, because you know each other, you like each other, you hang out anyway. So these things don't ever really become a problem. It usually is a problem with newer groups, and they're just getting to know people. And I tell the guys, I said, listen, as you start your game group and as you become, game group, sometimes it's a little bit like dating. This ain't going to work out. Sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
It's just like dating. It's not you, it's me. Actually, it's you. Maybe it's me. I don't know. But it ain't happening. Yeah. And so, it's okay. It's a social, everything that comes with social comes with a social tabletop game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right there, because, I play with most people that I've been playing with now for a long time, and they'll ask me after a session or something, they'll be like, hey, did you cheat that roll? And I'll just be like, I'll be like, no, I didn't. Maybe. They'll be like, what? Oh my gosh, that was crazy. Or I'll be like, yeah, I totally did. And they're just like, oh man, I thought so, but I'm glad you did, because that was awesome.
Right. You do. This is the same conversations I have. And sometimes I'll even tell them, dudes, I'm not lying to you. I did not. That is the actual roll. I actually rolled this. Yeah. And I'll even sometimes show them the dice, because it makes it a little bit more suspenseful, and it's the kind of a fun element that, oh my gosh, random fate decided this,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, now, Major, I've been talking your ear off. I mean, we're like, technically we're out of time. I want to respect your time, but I did want to talk to you about the Major's Guide to Alignment that you
Yes.
that you have written and you have published on the DMs Guild.
Yes.
Why do you feel alignment needs a treatment?
I'll tell you, man, because honestly, I wrote this after I went to a con, and I actually put this kind of in the introduction of the book. There was a young dungeon master, and he was helping a new player develop a character, and he was super awesome DM, very, very helpful. He was knowledgeable. He was being very helpful to this player starting their new character. Got time to alignment. He said, "Oh, that really doesn't matter. You can just pick anything." And I was like, "Huh, that's an interesting viewpoint of alignment." And I reread Fifth Ed, and there is fairly scant amount of page space devoted to alignment. And in the older days, that really wasn't the case. There was a kind of a more of a deal placed on alignment. Mm-hmm. And of course, I have my own opinions of alignment, and I put those in the guide. And I think that it is a great guide. I really am pleased. I'm proud of that work. I think it's very helpful to a lot of people. It's a very ontological look at what is alignment. Why is it important? And the biggest reason is, I can look at it this way. A lot of times for people who say alignment's not really important, they kind of combine it with a class. And they'll play, they'll fall into this trap of, well, this class must be played this way because, let's use the assassin class as an example. Well, they're clearly evil, right? No, they're not. But if you don't have a strong alignment system within the game, then they kind of become that character based on the class. But in actuality, there's two separate things. Class is what you do. Alignment is why you do. And so from the character standpoint, obviously, so the character's class is what they do: fighter, magic user, thief, whatever it is. The alignment is why they do that. And again, from the character's perspective. So far from being unimportant, it actually is a very defining aspect of that character. It provides the why are they even adventuring. I mean, let's be honest, that most of us wouldn't sign up to be adventurers. I mean, their life's pretty hard. We're going to go into the woods or somewhere that's dangerous. We don't have much food. We don't have any money. And there's the things that are trying to kill us. Or I could stay home and get 3 squares and earn a wage. Let me just stay here and sleep in a bed. I mean, most people would not really want to become adventurers. Hence, we had played a game about it. Mm-hmm. And so what is motivating these guys to go do what they're doing? Well, obviously they have the PC gleam, as we call it. They're player characters. Something is motivating them to go out and do this. Of course, the game, from the standpoint of the player, obviously we're playing a game. But from the standpoint of the character, what motivates that character to do that? And that's what alignment's all about. And so alignment then becomes a very useful tool in defining your character so that this is your guy. And it helps to define what that guy is. And just because there's a knight over there in shining armor, for all you know, that knight could be lawful evil. You have no idea. Based on how he looks like. He could be a completely evil guy. He doesn't necessarily have to be the knight in shining armor, doesn't have to be the lawful good guy. Although that's a great character. There's nothing wrong with that character. It's a wonderful character. But a lot of times in my class, I'll entertain, questions, and I get them all the time. It's, oh, there's no such thing. You can't have a lawful good barbarian. Oh, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you can. What a lawful good assassin? Heck yeah. What do you call I can give you a perfect example of a lawful good assassin. Like who? I said vampire hunter, monster killer, troll slayer. These are perfect descriptions of a
Jason
assassin
Bourne
class. Yeah, Jason Bourne. Yeah, he could be a lawful good assassin. Oh, and fiction's full of them. I mean, fiction's full of these examples. What's chaotic good? I had a question. What is chaotic? I said, well, the classic is Robin Hood. Robin Hood's the classic chaotic good character. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be your chaotic good character, but it's a classic example.
Yeah.
It's not because he was a ranger in the woods. or a thief, or he wasn't. It's not because he was a thief he was chaotic good. It was because he was chaotic good. And he happened to be whatever class he was. If you want to make him up as a D&D character, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about paladins? Are they all lawful good? They were back in the day.
No, not now.
Not now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's lots of different kind of paladins. You can be a lawful good paladin, and again, it comes down to, and see, this is where the game of D&D kind of talks out of both sides of their mouth in a way where it does sort of minimize alignment, but it doesn't, because guess what? There's a list of deities, and presumably the deities are the moral authority, quote unquote, for that alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So if a paladin is following a lawful good deity, well, then guess what? He's going to be lawful good. Mm-hmm. If he is a neutral good deity, then that paladin will then be neutral good. Mm-hmm. These in other words, these alignments have these kind of astral, godlike creatures that exemplify that alignment, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so that's been part of the game. Like I said, whole cosmologies have been based in D&D on alignment.
Yeah.
And so it's far from unimportant. It's a structure to build your character within. Yeah. And again, there's lots of different ways you can do that. I certainly am not prescriptive in terms of this is the only way to do it. But I provide a way, and I think it's a good way. That is, I think, flexible enough to encompass just about every play style. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's why I wrote. I think there was a need for it. I said, hey, there's because otherwise you're going to fall into the trap of class determines who you are, mm-hmm. and that is not true. You can be any class in any alignment. It doesn't matter. You can be chaotic good paladin. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. And I, of course, checked it out, and I thought some of your ideas in there were interesting. And I think one of the keys that you had mentioned was really understanding why your character is doing some of the things that they're doing, right? And I think we're always searching for those on some level. It's just like you were mentioning, not many of us would choose the adventurer life, but there is a romanticism kind of about it. Well, why are a lot of player characters, why are a lot of them orphans or have a tragic past? Is because we're trying to balance that idea of saying, well, if he grew up with, a normal family and an awesome childhood, he probably just got a job and got married and settled down or something. We're trying to think of some reason why they're doing, or some kind of holy vow or some kind of thing that pushes them out there. And I think that's when things get really interesting.
Bingo. And my guide to alignment is a tool. It's a tool mm-hmm. to help both the dungeon master and the player to develop characters, including non-player characters, including antagonists. Why is the bad guy behaving the way he does? How can I use this alignment structure to make a memorable antagonist? I've always contend that the best bad guys don't think they're bad. Mm-hmm. The best bad guys, they don't think they're evil. They think they're doing something important. It could be completely insane, like Vecna or a Surak. To use Dungeons and Dragons villains. I mean, they're straight crazy. They think that what they're doing, though, is justifies all the horror and evil that they do. But if you ask them, they wouldn't really think they're evil. Mm-hmm. They just think that they're justified in doing what they do.
Yeah.
The greatest example in fiction, in comic books, probably is Lex Luthor, typical lawful evil guy. I mean, he's like the benchmark. He's the mm-hmm. tyrant, which typifies the lawful evil. And there's, you got all the different types. So for the dungeon master, the guide for alignment is very useful to create memorable NPCs and of good and evil. And also to how would this antagonist behave? What motivates the antagonist?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
I think Thanos, right, in the Marvel movies, right? he's like, no, I'm doing this for the benefit of everybody. Yeah, I got to kill half the people in existence, but
somehow killing half of everything is a good thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Dude, you're crazy, man. You're straight crazy.
Yeah, you're crazy.
But so he thinks everything. He didn't understand why everyone's against him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, and I will make sure in the show notes for this episode to include a link to the Major's Guide to Alignment there on the DMs Guild. So anybody who's listening right now, you head over to dicegeeks.com, find the show notes for this episode, and there'll be a link to that right there.
Hey, one last thing, Matt. I know we're running out of time, but I'd like to put in a plug if I can. There's some of the stuff I'm working on right now.
Absolutely.
There's again, Omni Gamer. One of the games I love immensely is called Electric Football. You may remember it as kids. The little vibrating table, the vibrating board, and the football players move along the vibrating board.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's still going well. So it's alive and well. It's going strong. It's still got a great following. I consider it a board game because it is. It's the most unique board game on earth. And I do a lot of work with Tudor Games, who they're still there. They've been making since 1947. They've been making electric football. And I do work with them. They are coming out with a very exciting new product. I'm not at liberty to discuss exactly what it is, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention for the game, because it's something that I really do kind of feel strongly about. I don't know why you don't see more electric football games at gaming conventions. It's a board game like every other board game, except that the players actually move. But all of the strategy that's part of football is there. All of the miniature painting aspects of miniature hobbies is part of electric football. It's a miniatures board game, and it's fascinating to see when it's kind of introduced to the greater gaming community. There, people have the same thing that happened to me. Although I played it as a kid, it's the same thing. Like, gosh, why haven't I played this before? And I'm like, I know. It's like this awakening. You're like, how did I not know this existed? So I feel kind of always. I feel like an ambassador to the greater gaming community. To hey, don't forget about electric football. It's a board game too. When you're looking for your next board game to purchase, give them a look. It's really good stuff, and it's very well supported. And especially if you're a sports fan, if you're a football fan, of course, it's completely dovetails in. But even if you're not, you'll if you're a miniatures gamer, you'll find a lot of commonality.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what I'm working on here lately. Has been working with the guys at Tudor Game, and that's all on my website as well.
Okay, and what's your website?
Website is https www.themajorpress.com.
Okay.
And it's a pretty simple affair. Just go to the carousel of pictures and click on them, and it'll take you links to all kind of things.
All right. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes for this episode, which can be found at dicegeeks.com. Well, Major, I mean, it's been a blast talking with you. I could keep asking you questions about games, but we're running over here, and I want to respect your time and that. And so, I really do appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem. And hey, tomorrow, the 10th, I'm teaching Dungeon Master class at Heroic Adventures. Well, of course, by the time this airs, that'll be long past.
Yeah.
So never mind that. But no, Matt, I would love it if you could show up at one of the classes one day. I would love to have you, dude. Yeah. And I would love to talk to you again. I can tell you and I are cut from the same cloth, my friend.
Well, thanks.
All right, brother. Well, hey, thank you so much again for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with the Major today. It was a pleasure getting to speak with him. As you can see, he is a wealth of Dungeon Master knowledge. And as I mentioned in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com, you will find links to his website as well as to the Major's Guide to Alignment. Definitely want to check that out. Seriously. All right, guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I gave the pitch again at the top. This is usually where I do it, but if you can support the show in some way, I would really appreciate that. It is a lot of work putting these episodes together, and I really want to hear from you guys, and I really want as many people as possible who love tabletop role-playing games to experience this show. So since I mentioned that at the top, I'm not going to mention it again, but I really do thank you for listening, and I hope you get a lot out of these episodes, and I hope you're becoming a better game master and a better role player because of them. So until next Wednesday, keep gaming.